it right itself is a reinforcer, automatically reinforced behavior. When we do stuff and we got it right, getting it right is the reinforcer. When I put gas in my car, yesterday I went to the gas station, put gas in my car. You know how I know when it's time to quit turning the gas cap when I put it back on my car? Well, eventually it stops. It stops
Starts to
turning.
click.
It clicks. It
Yeah.
clicks. So that click is the reinforcer. That click says, you got it right, Ted. Way to go, Ted. Air high.
Good job, Ted.
That click is my reinforcer. Getting it right is the reinforcer, right?
Yeah.
What happens when we don't get it right? We keep trying. We've learned you got to keep trying. And if you keep trying and you keep not getting it right and you're getting it wrong, we've not only learned for getting it right itself to be a conditioned reinforcer, to be automatically reinforced behavior, but getting it wrong, doing something wrong itself becomes a conditioned punisher. And it doesn't feel good unless you're like doing it wrong on purpose. That's called being naughty in a saucy sort of way. And that's an entirely
That's a whole nother presentation.
That's entirely different thing from another group. But you know, getting it wrong is a conditioned punisher, and punishers often are things we don't like, and they often produce a whole lot of respondent behavior, a whole lot of emotional behavior. And of course, a kid in that situation might try for a little while, or a kid in that situation is just going to disconnect a little bit and daydream or draw pictures or get up and leave the desk or do any number of things, right? And then we're told, no, you got to get back to work. And then here comes the well-meaning behavior analyst who puts a token system in place. And if it works under those circumstances, it doesn't result in the kid doing work. It results in the kid staying at the desk, not getting up, not leaving, and not creating problems for other people. But that's the only lesson learned. Sit and wait until it's time to go. Now, that's a really good lesson for a lot of people to learn, but that's not the lesson that's needed at that point. Sometimes we need to take a look at the academic aspect of things as we take a look at any other behavior, because ill-fitting academics can lead to, oh, dig this, ill-fitting academics can lead to educational and emotional and behavioral blisters, just as ill-fitting news can, okay?
I like the metaphor. Wow, that was great. Yeah, that was.
How's that for an analogy? Okay, can I share a visual aid now?
You can. I just kind of wanted to throw out something that kind of clicked with me when you said that. I mean, we work with those students that just expect that outcome, that failure to kind of constantly occur whenever presented with this work.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And this is a problem. I mean, we work in a variety of now states, schools. This is a problem throughout all schools. I mean, I see ill-fitting instruction and curriculum just about everywhere we go. I mean, I think it's a consistent problem.
And it doesn't mean, oh, those stupid teachers, or oh, those stupid, it doesn't mean that at all. Right?
No.
It doesn't mean that at all. We'll get to that moment, but can I share my visual aid?
I am excited about the visual aid.
Okay, so I'm going to share screen. Yeah, I'm going to share my desktop, sharing it. So I hope nothing embarrassing comes up.
Awesome.
Okay, now this is
I like your
PowerPoint. Yeah, this is from a PowerPoint that I put together for one of my courses. And that's an anvil, right? And the only place I know you can buy anvils is Acme. Back in the day, anvils were used by blacksmiths who would use them to, shape iron and shape other metals, right? They would heat the metal up and they would put it on the anvil and they would pound and pound and pound and change the shape and everything. Well, nowadays, anvils are only used by birds, roadrunners, I think, roadrunners, to drop on coyotes.
I think they're actually used by the coyote to try to drop on the roadrunner, but the coyote always fails. So
I think, yeah, and the coyote always ends up getting crushed by the anvil.
Exactly.
But lovers, you got to love that about the coyote. He's resilient.
He never gives up. Yeah, he also never learns, but he never gives up.
He never gives up. He's resilient. Okay. Well, let's think of our students' behavior or our clients' behavior as similar to this anvil, okay? Now, what do we know about anvils? They're sort of big, they're sort of heavy, they're difficult to move, right? My guess is I would need to get back to CrossFit and go about 1,000,000 times in order to build up the strength to move an anvil. But what I'd probably do is hire someone to do it. Anyway, anvils are big and heavy, right? They don't move. Well, this is an instruction, and there is the anvil, right? The instruction is your student's behavior or your client's behavior. And there you are. And I don't mean to choose a graphic of a woman. It could be a graphic of a man. It could be a graphic of a person who identifies as a woman or a man. The fact is, it's all drag. We're born naked. It's all drag. Don't worry. But here we are with this anvil. And I'm saying, do this. I'm pushing on the anvil, right? The instruction's pushing on the anvil. Is the anvil going to move? What do you think?
I don't think it's going to move very far if it does move.
I mean, it might move, right?
We might budge it.
And if I'm relying only on instructions, it's going to be really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But look at this. What do reinforcers do? They pull the behavior along. And I don't mean for this to be just a picture of a little girl. This could be a picture of a little boy, a picture of anyone who identifies as a little girl or a little boy. I don't mean to be
We're really in PC mode here today.
Could be elderly. This is, you know, again, it's all drag. We're born nude. It's all drag. But there's this thing, and I don't mean to call a child a thing, but the reinforcer pulls the behavior along, right? When we provide a history of reinforcement, the behavior gets pulled along by those reinforcers. Behavior flows where reinforcers go, or behavior goes where reinforcers flow. Think about that. Fortune cookie moment. And
nice little mantra.
Be, you know, whatever about that. Now, if there's a history of reinforcement for doing what it is you're telling the kid to do, or things like what it is you're telling the kid to do, if there's a history of reinforcement, there's that history of reinforcement pulling that behavior along, which lets the instruction do its job. Now, that doesn't mean that our instructions will never work until the child's gotten reinforcement for doing that specific thing, right? Because
exactly.
whatever you tell a child to do or ask, whatever task you put before the child in school, the child's had other tasks put before him in school. So there are similarities there already, right? There's similarities. So the child will attempt, the child will sit, the child will pay attention, or at least look like paying attention, because all that's been reinforced in the past. But if what the child experiences for that particular kind of task or that task is failure, 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 if the child is never getting it right or gets it right with decreasing frequency, we no longer have that reinforcement pulling the behavior along. And those instructions are going to be less and less effective. And the more there is a history of failure, and I don't mean academic failure at the end of the quarter or end of the semester, end of the school year, I mean just not getting stuff right, the more likely the child is to not do what is asked and instead do something else. Again, behavior flows where reinforcement goes, or behavior goes where reinforcement flows. I don't remember which one it is. But why I bring that up here is because we all do this. You know, when something's easy, we'll work on it for a while. If it's too easy, we're bored, right? It has to be the right amount of difficult. If it's difficult, we'll keep at it. But if we're just not getting anywhere, we eventually get a little upset and we quit, right? Or we may learn to control our emotional responses and we quit. We do something else. This is what a lot of kids do every day when they have that ill-fitting instruction, like a pair of ill-fitting shoes. We take the shoes off because they hurt. We escape those shoes because they hurt. Well, kids escape the instruction because it's not working. because
Yeah,
it's
and Ted,
instruction. So that ends my visual aid portion for right now.
what can you leave that? Well, okay, never mind.
No, I'll put it
I
back.
Yeah, put that back up because I think it broaches a good question, I think, that or assumption a lot of teachers make. And certainly what you're not saying is I think a lot of teachers just assume that reinforcement immediately should look like getting something done and doing it right.
Yeah.
But sometimes that understanding is not there. And we've got to associate that kind of more kind of intrinsic reinforcement, if you will, that with something that is more tangible, more immediate, to develop that relationship to where you create the understanding that, hey, getting this thing done is really good, and I want to do it. So,
Well, and there are lots of ways we can do that. A lot of them are incredibly low tech and don't involve an iPad.
exactly, yeah.
Most of them are. A lot of it is a lot of yes, 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 got it, way to go. I see that. A lot of it is just giving the attention at the right time. You know what also helps with this? There's this OL instructional method, OL apostrophe instructional method, published in 1977 by Nancy Neef, called interspersal training. And then it's since been called high P treatment and behavioral momentum, because people like renaming the same old thing and presenting it as something new. But essentially what this is embedding difficult things or more difficult things in a bunch of easier things. Now, it shouldn't be too easy because you're all, whatever. You know, if I went to work today, like I am now, and if my job was to write the alphabet, okay, I'm good at that, Chad. I can do that. And I do it once or twice. If my job was to sit there for 8 hours and write the alphabet, I think within about 4 minutes, I'd be doing something else, right?
Yeah.
But not enough reinforcement there. If my job today was to run that 8-minute mile, I'm going to put that off a little bit, and I might not get around to it. Just like the 5 baskets of laundry sitting in my bedroom right now that haven't been put away for 2 weeks. Somehow I wear the clothes, put them in the hamper, wash them, put it back in the basket, but I never put the clothes away. You know, if there's not reinforcement built into the activity, we figure out ways to not do it.
That's right.
When there's a lot of failure. So you want to embed the more difficult things in a good baseline of a lot of things the student's likely to be successful with. So instead of no, 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 kid throws a chair, he's out of there, better call in the behavioral goon squad. What it is from the kid's perspective, yes, 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 yes. Oh, not yes yet. I'm going to work on this one. Okay, yes, I think I got it. And then on to the next one. Yes, 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 yes. You know, what we have there is a high rate of reinforcement for doing the work put in front of the child, which, you know, produces motivation that keeps the kid going with that next one that's more difficult. May get it right, may not get it right. Even if he gets it wrong, though, it's not the same thing as no, 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 and then another one that's no. It's yes, 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 no. Okay, I just had a bunch of yeses. I'm going to keep going. Yes, 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 yes. You know, and when the instruction, when the content is that ill-fitting shoe, the kid takes it off and throws it, right?
Yeah, and I think this is a good time, and this can get kind of a controversial, kind of fun topic. A good time to talk about kind of how we got here, because there is this assumption that a student that has an IEP has properly fitting instruction and curriculum, and you know what my experience is that's very rarely true. When you go into a classroom.
Not rarely ever, but
not rarely ever, but
our sample is biased because we get
my sample, in my side of my experience, in my sample.
Yeah, only for the kids who are having difficulties.
It's pretty rare to see, and I think it's important to look at like all the factors that kind of go into this. I mean, and of course we kind of got an example of this is, you know, there's a financial factor to some of this. You know, there is a funding mandate. So whenever you're receiving funds for students, school divisions get funds. There's accountability that's being looked after. whether it be by the federal IDEA and FATE, or the state, or the local, or even at the administrative level of the school building. And with, especially in Virginia, what's happened is this pendulum keeps swinging to one extreme or the other. And right now it's really swung to everything has to be aligned goals. So, it's not unusual to walk into a classroom with kids with significant, moderate to severe disabilities, and they have goals that are well outside of the range of their capability and where they would find success. But when you speak with the teacher and even the SPED director about it, it's, well, we're in audit, we're being told this is what the goal has to look like, so there is some pressure there. But then on the other side too, I think, just in complete honesty, parents drive this a lot. I think a lot of times parents are looking for really high bars being set. This past summer, I've been in several IEP meetings where the language of the parents was, let's set the bar a lot higher than what we're doing. Let's make it a lot more difficult. And everybody around the table that has that experience in education and teaching and understands kind of where the baseline of the student is saying, no, this is going to elicit behavior. If we put this in front of the student, we're going to get really maladaptive behavior from them. But you're still getting the push from the advocate and from the parent for it. So it really is kind of, there's so many things working that have kind of gotten us to this point. And what we need to do, in my opinion, and one of the reasons why I think ABA fits so nicely like a good shoe salesman, and if we'll continue your metaphor, and into the public school, is that we really do focus on that student outcome. That is what our priority is, not always kind of meeting certain demands. But I always, whenever I walk into a classroom, I have to kind of say to the teacher, look, I'm going to tell you what I know to be conceptually correct. But if that goes against policy, you need to follow the policy that you're given. But you also need to start becoming a voice of saying, hey, this is a problem. So, but it is interesting how we got here. I mean,
a couple things there. One, what I tell my students right off the bat when I'm teaching is that when you're a behavior analyst, there's nothing to take personally. This is all about testing out the procedures. We're all okay. I tell them baseline right now, first day of class, we're all okay. I'm okay, you're okay. The old self-help book was called. We're all okay. It's all about testing the procedures. The procedures may be right. The procedures may be part of the way there. The procedures may not get us there at all. It's just about testing the procedures. And we look at the data and we go where the data tell us. And once we understand it's about testing the procedures, we don't have to take it personally at all. But for people who aren't accustomed to working that way, and a lot of people aren't, not just a lot of teachers, but a lot of people aren't, it's easy to take stuff very personally. Instead, if the teacher's competent, I'm competent, you're competent. I goof stuff up big time sometimes, and I goof stuff up little times too. But I'm still competent. I just goofed something up. Means that one didn't work. Let's do it differently, right? So, teachers are sometimes, people are sometimes in the position where they haven't learned. It's not about you. You're fine. It's about the procedure. It's also the case that administrators don't often understand that, or department chairs. And so when things aren't working out well, they come down on the teacher. But what if the teacher's doing everything right, everything by the book? And sometimes it literally is by the book. If you're doing direct instruction, it is by the book,
exactly.
Literally. And it may not be working well. Well, the teacher's doing what the teacher's supposed to do, right? The administrator doesn't get it. That means it's time to change the procedure, not time to yell at the teacher. Yeah. So what are you going to say?
So, I was just going to interrupt because I'm assuming you're talking about direct instruction, like
which is a great
practice of direct instruction. I love it. Yeah. But one thing I've learned over the past and being married to a teacher the past couple of years is that we need to emphasize that we're talking capital D, capital I direct instruction. A lot of times when you refer to direct instruction to a classroom teacher, they see it as just standing in front of the classroom, teaching. So that would be little d, little I. We're talking about Engelman, isn't that who?
Yeah, Engelman and Carnine, the actual direct instruction procedures.
Which a lot of teachers do. Like one really famous or infamous, maybe, I don't know, kind of word study program, Walpole McKenna, that teaches reading and phonetic reading, is out of direct instruction research, came out of UVA, that program, but it uses direct instruction. So
yeah, well, it's been around forever. I remember we had it when I was in school, when I was in grammar school in the 60s. We had it. That was how reading was taught. That was how math was taught. And it worked really well, and it still works. But, you know, and so a kid here in the US in one of our classrooms can learn really well with direct instruction if it's at the right instructional level. If I'm giving a typical first grader calculus in direct instruction, and getting it right is a conditioned reinforcer for this kid, I can turn that first grader into a hellion by insisting that he stay and participate in this evidence-based practice, this good, demonstrated a million times to be effective practice that is being implemented with content that is completely irrelevant and inappropriate for this child's instructional level, right? Mm-hmm. It's about the procedures, which include not only how you're teaching, but what you're teaching. And what you're teaching needs to be kind of just overlapping a little bit where the kid is and going a little bit beyond where the kid is. So we're always nudging the kid forward. And with things being so standards-based now, people meant well with the standards, but I, for the life of me, can't understand why a kid who can't read, can't write, barely speaks, can't tie his shoes, can't tell you when he's hungry or thirsty, can't say stop it, why that child needs to be able to identify water and land on both a map and a globe. Yeah, that's one of our standards of learning. And that's one of the things that isn't a VAP binder or a VAP assessment for a kid in special ed. And you can see how teaching that, you know, that irrelevant stuff, this is why teachers are so darn busy, February, March, April, as VAP time approaches, as the deadline approaches.
Catch up, yeah.
We kind of put it off, right? Because a lot of it's irrelevant given their students, and it's what they have to do rather than what they want to do. And what I work with these teachers on is, you know, well, wait a second. They don't say how you have to teach it. They just say the kid has to be able to do this. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of different ways that we can incorporate that and other things the kid has to do. The kid needs to learn how to do because it'll be useful. Matching to sample is useful in a million different ways. Motor imitation is useful in a million different ways. Some kids need to learn those. What if I'm teaching pointing to water, pointing to land on a map, and again on a globe? What if I'm teaching that through motor imitation? While I'm teaching motor imitation, what if that's one of the targets for matching to sample? While I'm teaching matching to sample, what if that's one of the generalization things? You know, pointing to liquids, water, 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 whether it's in a cup, whether it's in a bottle, whether it's in the sink, whether it's on the floor, whether it's on the map. You know, there are a million different ways that we can incorporate that. But again, the content, the instructional methods, the procedures are what we're testing here. And we have to let go of the ego and be willing to change them. And the content selection is what we're also testing there. And one of the things that I've learned a million times before is that when we match the content to the kid's instructional level, and when we use instructional procedures that permit not only succeeding, but actually moving forward with a little bit of getting it wrong. You need some getting it wrong there. The kid needs to learn both sides of the contingencies. The behavior problems very often remedy themselves. I see Gino Binkert is watching on the watch party on Facebook Live.
Way to give a shout out, Ted.
Gino Binkert. He is best teacher in the world, tied with all my other friends who are teachers. Behavior analyst, BCBA, LBA, Culpeper County Schools. I supervised him in his classroom. Gino would get the kids sent to his class who had behavior problems. He had kids in his class because instructionally that was the appropriate setting for there, but sometimes kids would be sent there because there were behavior problems and they wanted Gino to fix the behavior problems before the kids were sent back.
Yeah,
and he would do that. He would do that. But then what was wanted was for there to be follow-up so that if there were problems in the other classroom, they could call Gino and he'll leave his classroom and run up there and fix it. What I suggested, hold on. I know you want to say something. I'll shut up a minute. What I suggested to Gino was talk with the administration about turning that around. How about this? When things are going well, when the kid's doing well, that's when the teacher calls you randomly. And you just show up out of nowhere and say, dude, I heard you're doing great work. Way to go. Things went so beautifully after that. Moved him out of the position of being the behavioral goon squad to you know, from Mr. Yuck to Mr. whatever the opposite of Mr. Yuck is.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'll be quiet.
Yeah, you're fine. It's Gino. I was kind of similar. My classroom was kind of the last stop on the way out to, threats of private day placement and things that more significant behaviors filtered through. But what the solution was in my classroom, it wasn't really anything very complicated other than just the instruction was designed to engage the students where they were instead of trying to bring the kids to where I was, at a level that I was teaching. And it seems like such a simple concept in special education that we're always teaching to where the kid is, but that's not really always the case. One of the things I bumped on when you were talking about the VAP is there is now this occurrence of, and I'd be curious if there's any teachers out there on your live stream that are Virginia teachers, where VAP goals are now put into the IEPs at the encouragement of administration, VDOE. And that's all they're working on in the IEPs are the ASOL, the VAP goals, the aligned standards. And it puts a really weird pressure on the teacher, which is not to say that you can't work on those things, but again, when we've talked about it a lot on this show, that the way you teach something is really more important than what you're teaching in terms of this. And I'm always baffled at the lack of kind of preparation or kind of planning for instructional methodology. So one of the things I talk to teachers a lot about when we're consulting on IEP goals is, okay, you've written an IEP goal. This is what you're targeting. Now, how are you going to teach it? And the response is, well, what do you mean? And so, well, you should have a research-based or evidence-based method. That's what IDEA says, methodology plan to teach this specific goal. But we're not really wired to think that way for some reason in the classrooms. We think more about the goal, or we think more about the curriculum rather than the instructional methodology. And when I think we start talking about what the role of ABA actually is in school, I think it is that how you're going to teach this specific outcome. And if you are in a situation as a teacher where you've got this pointing to land, pointing to water, or being able to identify the continents, there's a lot to be said for a behavioral approach to instruction using any of the evidence-based practices that kind of fall within our scope to teach some of this stuff. And I think that really is, at the end of the day, where ABA can support the classroom in one of the strongest ways. So
yeah, I have less of a headache about teaching things that on the surface don't have a whole lot of face validity, like identifying land and water on a map and a globe. Since I figured out that, well, wait a second, okay, I can teach that using this particular procedure. And the kid also needs to learn how to put on his shoes and how to do this and how to do this and how to do this. And I can use that same procedure for those things. So if I'm teaching those things using this procedure and he's learning, that only helps him also learn that other thing, that pointing to land and pointing to water on a map and a globe. Because what I'm doing is giving him experience with this procedure, giving him experience learning with this procedure. So when this procedure is presented, and it's not as though I have to say, all right, now we're doing matching to sample. I don't have to tell him, because it's going to feel the same. It's going to go the same. His behavior will move in the same direction, right? It's practicing learning to learn when I'm doing the same procedure. So, okay, if the goals seem irrelevant, I can still teach them, and I can still teach the other stuff, because what I'm teaching is how to learn. And I
Right.
need to use the right procedures to teach how to learn.
And if there is, you know, one of the things I've found interesting about with the COVID shutdown, and there's just so much uncertainty about how school will start up, what school will look like, is we're rethinking instruction. We're having to, across the board, not just for learners with IEPs, but across the board. There is now this need to rethink the way instruction is happening in public schools. And I think that's a good thing. I think that it's been a long time since we've kind of deviated from the traditional model of education, and things have changed a lot, both how kids interact with adults and how they interact with information and the availability of information, and just like simple little things that are occurring out of COVID. I don't really understand why you can't get a quarter anymore. Like, have you encountered this, that you can't get change?
No.
Yeah.
Although
So there's a short.
people are charging it. They're using their ATM cards, or they're charging everything.
Yeah, and if anybody knows the answer out there, feel free to type it in Facebook. But for some reason, there is a shortage of pocket change, like to the point where, like, Kroger now, if you pay with cash, they don't have the change to give back to you, so they're giving you a Kroger card for the change, for the loose change. They'll give you dollars, but if it's coin, which is interesting, because I have always been this. It drives me crazy when I'm asked to teach a learner with significant learning deficits and developmental delays coins. I mean, I think I have better, bigger fish to fry from a functional standpoint. But
Winko, the best teacher in the world, developed a stimulus equivalence training procedure that can do that in an hour. Just saying.
Teach coins?
Yes, and we have the 2-month follow-up data, retention data, not maintenance, retention. No opportunity to practice in the meantime. 2-month follow-up data to show that 2 months later, the kid is doing it just as well as the kid did it when you first taught it. Just saying.
Now, just out of curiosity, now we're getting sidetracked, but that's what we do, Ted, so it's okay. But now I'm curious, is the retention data that the kid can identify the coins, or the kids can use the coins and make change?
Okay, it's not using and making change. We're after teaching coin values. But what it is the kid can name the coin, the kid can choose the coin when named, the kid can choose the value of the coin when presented the coin, the kid can choose the value of the coin when given the name of the coin, and given the value, the kid can, it's all of those things. It's the coin front and back. And what really stinks is now in the US, we have like 1,000 different quarters, right? The front is
I know. Yeah. It's really hard.
We have like 1,000 different backs. It's not like the country's broke, it's not like we don't have money to like spend on other things. Instead, let's spend it on making 1 billion different quarters. But I'll quit editorializing. But
but the good news is apparently there's no more quarters, which is great. But what I was kind of getting at is the concept of cash and change is kind of antiquated. I mean, when we go to the store, 9 times out of 10, I'm using, actually pretty much for me, I never have cash on me. I use a card.
Now we're back to the Illuminati.
Yeah, well, there you go, back to the Illuminati. And I even think about, like, I got myself set up on Apple Pay the other day, and started using that some. So you're not going to do it?
I'm old. I'm afraid of technology.
No, you're not old-fashioned. And I think it's important. We don't ever really do a good job of reintroducing ourselves, but your doctorate is in instructional design, correct?
Yeah, but I had a really weird combination of 1 million courses from 1 million different areas. And I worked in a bunch of different settings under a bunch of different kinds of supervision. So I'm a licensed psychologist, a licensed professional counselor, a licensed behavior analyst, and I do tons of instructional design. I do academic remediation. I do mental health counseling. I've done a bunch of testing, but I'm so bored with testing, I don't really do that anymore. There are people who are more interested who do a better job of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of gets a little redundant, but kind of taking us off topic a little bit. I don't remember what the topic was at this point. We're talking about academics and behavior.
Yeah. And academics are doing math is behavior.
Well,
Reading
yeah.
is behavior. Doing math, you put the math problem in front of the kid. What this is for us behavior analysts, this is textual behavior and intraverbal behavior and listener behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's 2 plus 2. I have to read it. That's the textual. And it's part tect. And it's intraverbal, and that 2 plus 2 evokes the response 4 from me. So in that way, it's intraverbal, but I'm also tacting that as 2 plus 2, and I write 4 down on the paper below it. It's a whole lot of different things that is
Yep.
done there. And I think that's why behavior analysts who understand that academics is behavior, because anything we say, do, think, or feel is behavior, why we're really good with academic remediation. But I'm thinking we wouldn't need to do academic remediation if more people understood academics as behavior and taught academics the same way they teach other behavior, unless they're going to save it for the behavioral goon squad.
Well, I think what's true of education, and it's not true of teachers' motivations. I just think of just kind of how public education is
Yeah.
structured. A bunch of kids come into a classroom, and there is this assumption that they want to learn the information. First of all, I think, and that's where problem one starts. There's some assumption of motivation because the child is in the classroom, they want to learn from the teacher. And I think that's where you see a lot of problem behavior generated. And then there is, even though there has been this push for differentiation of instruction, it's just teachers struggle with differentiating across a classroom of 25 kids.
The teacher might want to sleep or use the bathroom or take care of his or her own children or go to the supermarket or put away the laundry sometime. I think the task that's sometimes put before the teacher is too large, which does not imply the teacher's incapable. It means if I have to differentiate for 25 kids, that's very different from differentiating for 4.
Well, and what I think's kind of important to point out about that, and we're going back to what you were talking about how we view like everything that's involved behaviorally with solving 2 plus 2, right? We kind of see all those components. So we are good at remediating because we kind of see everything that builds to the end result and like all the little kind of sequencing of behaviors that go through it. And we know we can identify where the deficit is a little bit easier and support it. Starting with the motivation just to do the problem. I mean, at some point, like initiation is one of the biggest problems that you see in a lot of classrooms, getting kids to do something. And I think it's a good time to kind of address the repetitive nature of a lot of our instruction, whether it's in the general education setting or the special education setting. There is this, practice effect is great. We want to practice things, but you can definitely take it too far. And if something becomes so repetitive that it is just tedious, you're going to lose motivation to do it. One of the things that I always get frustrated when I go into a self-contained classroom with functional learners is the students being asked to write their name like 15 times over and over again, just for the sake of forming the letters. And at some point, you got to ask yourself, what is the purpose of that repetition and that one sitting of writing their name?
I don't know about you, but when I was in grammar school back in the 60s, we had to do stuff like that. But I wasn't in special ed, and that's how we learned spelling words. We had to write each word 10 times, right?
Right.
It was to get the practice effect. And we're working on fine motor and all of that stuff. So there's that element of it. But now I forgot what I was going to say, the rest of it. I'm sorry.
Well, I'll help you out. What's interesting about
really
that, though, is in the general education setting, we don't ask kids to do that anymore. They don't work on quote unquote handwriting. It's a conversation I have with our OTs a lot. But in the self-contained setting, we really hyper focus on letter formation, and these are our functional learners, whereas it's not being focused on in the general education setting. And it creates a lot of behaviors because you're sitting someone down and kind of forcing, and it's not unusual to see an assistant or even an OT at times kind of leg spread in the kind of trapping the student up against the table to keep them engaged at the table, and just repetitively doing that. Essentially, we're going to talk about that next week, aren't we?
Yeah, I have another visual aid. This is essentially.
You came prepared for this one, Ted.
A wonderful, well, I'm in my office here at home. A great assessment, a great curriculum for functional learners. You do the assessment. It tells you what to teach and how to teach it. I love it. It's also, and it's developed by a friend of mine, Pat McGreevy, who's a really, really great person. It's also available in app form. And the app is tremendously easy to use. And so I would highly recommend it. I'm really wishing I could remember what I was going to say though, because it was right on point and it was really smart.
I was talking about repetitiveness.
Hold on, I'm putting that away. I remember. Regarding practice effect, it not only works, it works whether you think it's happening or not, whether you know it's happening or not, but it's also the case that it works for behavior you don't want as well as for behavior you do want.
It's very true.
And when the kid experiences failure, no. The kid is practicing experiencing no. Kid doesn't know what to do when he gets it right, which is why when he gets it right, you might get flipped off. But it's also the case that when you get stuff wrong over and over and over again, you tend to get a little emotional and you get angry and you do stuff that you might not typically do. And if you have the opportunity to do that often, because there's a lot of failure, you're practicing being angry and, you know, being belligerent and being aggressive and doing all sorts of things. And I bring this up because it's not just the case that if you use really good instructional procedures and you teach at the child's instructional level and just a little bit beyond to keep nudging them forward, that if the kid has that kind of history, the behavior is going to take care of itself. Just like everything else, there's always behavioral junk left over. What I have to do, what I do a lot with the kids I work with, is we practice making a mistake the right way. We practice getting upset the right way. You know, all of these things. Making a mistake the right way, say oops, and move on. Getting angry the right way. I have a kid who, I've worked with a kid who would swear, who would say all sorts of things that are contrary to the parents' religious beliefs and everything. And what he has on his desk, because what happened in the context of schoolwork, making mistakes, no surprise there, huh? And so we have note cards with what he can say instead as a prompt for him to say it. And we came up with them together. And so there's oh tartar sauce from SpongeBob. And there's, well, that wasn't good. And there's goof that one up. And there's, and there's, oh, fiddlesticks. Because I told him when I was a kid, way back when horse and buggy days, we used to say, oh, fiddlesticks. And he thought that was hilarious. So that's one of them. You know, we have to practice getting it wrong the right way.
Yeah.
And you know, that's only meaningful when we decrease the frequency with which a kid is getting it wrong. Because I don't want to be called in as part of the Goon Squad to write a to do an FBA and write a behavioral intervention program to get a kid to behave himself when he's responding to repeated failure on goals that are irrelevant to his life and beyond his instructional level, delivered by procedures that are kind of, you know, doomed to fail from the start. You know, all of it needs to be taken care of together.
Yeah, and we can't, I mean, realistically, we can't write an FBA on that. I mean, it's just, and I think that is one of the challenges of ABA in the school. It needs to be encompassing. And one of the unusual things about the manifestation of FBAs, functional behavior assessments in schools, is that they exist completely separate of the IEP, which doesn't really make any sense. I mean, it needs that if we're doing an FBA on a student, it really needs to be informing the IEP and the development of the IEP, and not something that runs parallel to it. And I think if schools could make one big change from a special education mindset. I think FBAs, the concept of them for students, if we start talking about academics being behavior, let's do an FBA for every kid that's got an IEP, as long as it's informing the IEP. But where FBAs are used now in the schools, they're only used when behavior has become so extreme, so maladaptive. That's the only time that we're talking about FBAs. And they very rarely take into account this mindset of, is the instructional delivery appropriate for that student, and is the content developmentally appropriate for that student? I think that's something that's got to start to merge eventually.
And good luck with that. It's going to take a lot of mindset change, because we are living in a time when everyone sues everything for everything, and parents lawyer up because the schools lawyer up, because parents have been treated badly, because the schools are great at a lot of things, but sometimes don't really include parents as much as they could. And so for the school to say, you know, maybe it's the method of instruction, maybe it's the content as part of the FBA process, is to kind of admit what might be, to do what might be taken as admitting culpability and expose them to liability. I was told when I worked for a big public school system up here, I made a mistake in someone's classroom. I called them later in the day from my little cubicle, my gray cubicle, but I had a window, so I was a bigwig, and apologized for it. And my boss, whose cubicle was right next to mine, she didn't get an office with doors and walls. She got a cubicle too. She yelled at me. She said, "Don't you ever apologize for anything ever again, because that exposes us to liability." So I kept apologizing. I just didn't do it from the office where she could overhear. But, you know, it would be great if we could all play nice together again, so that the fit of the instructional procedures and the instructional content to the child's current state could be open for inspection and consideration, just like anything else in the FBA process.
Yeah.
But it can't be. And the FBA process very often seems geared toward identifying the problem with or about the child or inside the child. Because if it's anything about the school or the instruction or anything else, it exposes them to liability.
Now, I do want to just throw, and I won't use any school divisions by name, but I do want to throw a couple of shout outs. There are some school divisions that are changing their mindset on this, and they're, you know, some very forward thinking SPED coordinators and directors. But it is changing mindset. And, you know, unfortunately, we've gotten to this point in special education that there's this divergence. There's two sides of the table. The school's sitting on one side of the table, the parents and maybe an advocate or even a private BCBA working for the parent is sitting on the other side of the table, where the original intent of the IEP process was a team process, like development by that team sitting around the table together.
Right. But you're right, though. It is across the table. It's now opposing teams.
Yeah. And I, in all fairness, because my background is in education, I think, but there's culpability on both sides.
Well, yeah.
And you know, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. What I find interesting about the FBA process, when it's done correctly, an FBA should be based off of data collection. We should talk about what we're collecting data on, how we're going to collect it. We should collect the data. We should use that data to inform whatever we're going to do, and then we should collect data on what we decided to do.
And we need to be more critical with regard to those goals and objectives, because 80% correct on 3 out of 4 occasions, when you do the math, it's 80% times 75%, which works out to be 60% correct.
I have had this conversation with so many people.
With the kid getting it wrong 40% of the time. Thank God that pilot schools don't do it that way.
Oh, I know. That's one of the things. But what I was saying about that FBA process, wouldn't it be great if that's how IEPs were developed? You know, and that's the actual intent of an IEP is to use present levels present level should be the data that's collected over the course of the year. But no, it's funny you bring that up. I have been preaching that for, when you say 80% 3 out of 4 times, well, what does that actually mean when you do the math? But nobody actually does the math. And
It's 60%.
Yeah, I went on this rampage of trying to support teachers, and this may get me in trouble, but I went on this rampage of trying to support teachers rewriting IEP goals to where the actual criterion made sense. And every single one of them got rejected by the VDOE and audit. And they made the teacher go back and write the 80% 3 out of 4 times. And it's kind of like trying to run uphill when you've buttered the hill sometimes.
Well, and it's not limited to elementary school and secondary school.
No.
It occurs in higher ed too. There was one time when I was told that that first off, I had far too many objectives in my syllabi because I had an objective for everything I taught.
Mm-hmm.
And they were too specific. I needed fewer, and I needed to vague them up.
Well, and it's funny because when BCBA, especially us as ones that work solely in the school system, when we get involved in looking at IEP goals, we really start talking about the way this goal should be written. There should be one target behavior. You can't say that the kid's going to do like 6 things in one IEP goal, but that's how a lot of goals are written.
Right.
And I think in some direct, like, again, I want to give kind of a shout out to some school divisions out there. They're kind of rethinking and bringing BCBAs into the conversation about IEP goals. One of the things that we have to offer in educational ABA is this understanding of really how to hone in on good data collection, good instruction, and that starts with a good goal. And if a teacher has a really concisely written goal that meets the standards of observable, measurable, repeatable, then it's going to be easier for them to instruct and teach and keep good data. And what gets school divisions in trouble is the lack of reliable, accurate, and valid data.
Or sometimes not having data at all.
Yeah, and then it's gone back and done kind of after the fact. But
I would love to keep prattling on with you all day on Facebook.
I know you would. We could do it all day long.
I have to change my clothes because I'm wearing gym shorts and my
polo.
Huh? Yeah.
Gym shorts and a polo. That's
my clients expect me to look a little bit more professional than that.
All right. Well, it's 10:30 anyway. I think next week we're going to talk about the essentials for
I hope so. I'm going to see if I can get one of my friends involved in that to come
I think that would be a great topic. And until then, guys, we'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye. Love you guys.